The first time Victor strolled back into our apartment wearing a $1,000 Italian trench coat and sunglasses that probably cost more than our monthly rent, I thought I was watching a bad movie. He dropped his suitcase, plastered with high-end logos, right in the middle of the living room and stretched like he had just conquered Rome itself. "Thanks for the upgrade, babe," he said, flashing that smug grin I used to fall for. "First class to Milan. Michelin stars. Italian leather. This is the life I've always deserved." He tossed his sunglasses onto the table and collapsed onto the couch, crossing his designer shoes on the coffee table like he was royalty. I stared at him, biting my cheek to stop myself from laughing. "What?" he asked, frowning. I tilted my head and smiled, slow and knowing. "Oh, Victor. You have no idea what you've done. My name is Eliza. I'm 33, and I've worked in digital forensics for the last decade, mostly behind the scenes in cybersecurity and financial fraud investigations. By day, I hunt down scammers and hackers. By night, I used to be married to one. I just didn't know it at the time." Victor had always been a charmer. The kind of man who could sell ice to a glacier and still have enough confidence left to seduce the weather itself. He was a fast talker, a daydreamer, and always teetering on the edge of brilliance, or disaster. I used to think we balanced each other out. I had the stability, the technical mind, the steady income. He had the fire, the ambition, the bold ideas. Except those ideas never seemed to manifest into anything tangible, just late nights and failed startups, each one somehow not his fault. For years, I paid the rent, covered the bills, and quietly absorbed the costs of loving someone with big dreams and no follow-through. But last week, Victor made a mistake that no amount of charm could undo. It was 2:11 a.m. when it happened. I'd been upstairs, asleep after a grueling day auditing a company's compromised payment gateway. Victor had kissed my cheek goodnight earlier, told me he was just going to watch a documentary on Roman architecture, something I knew was code for YouTube rabbit holes and whiskey. But that night, he did something different. He waited until I was fully asleep, then crept downstairs. He turned on my laptop, my work laptop, and accessed a folder labeled Client Dummies. He clicked through without understanding what he was opening. Just saw what looked like a real credit card file with a generous balance. He snapped photos of it on his phone, even jotted down the card number on a sticky note. He logged out, closed the lid, and slinked back into bed like nothing had happened. I woke up the next morning to a double espresso and a suspiciously cheerful husband. I knew something was wrong immediately. But I didn't let on. I waited until he left the house, claiming to have a networking event, and opened my phone. The alerts had already started flooding in. My dummy card, tied to one of our internal training programs, had been used to purchase a $12,000 watch in Geneva. A fake card. Not fake in the sense of being non-functional, but fake in that it was never tied to real funds. It was connected to our fraud monitoring system, designed to test how companies respond to real-time theft and breach simulation. Every transaction triggered an immediate escalation. And Victor had just turned himself into a live case study. I sat down at my kitchen table, took a sip of coffee, and smiled. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel betrayed. I felt calm. Because now, I had proof. I called my longtime friend and legal advisor, Bianca. "You're not going to believe this," I said, walking her through everything, step by step. The laptop access, the screenshots on my security logs, the transactions piling up across Europe. Bianca didn't even try to hide her amusement. "Wait. He stole a decoy card from your cybersecurity testing folder? Eliza, please tell me this is real." "It's very real," I said, pulling up the fraud dashboard. "He booked 5-star hotels, first-class flights, and a private tour of Milan's fashion district, all under a digital spotlight." Bianca let out a whistle. "Girl, you married a walking indictment." The next few days passed in a haze of luxury purchases and fraudulent confidence. Victor didn't return home. He left a note scribbled on a napkin. "Taking some time for myself. Don't wait up." Every night, I tracked him through his spending: Venice gondola rides, rooftop champagne bars, high-end tailors. He thought he was James Bond. Meanwhile, I was building a case that would make the FBI proud. By the third day, I got a call from a fraud agent named Marcus Navarro. Calm voice, clipped accent, and clearly impressed by what he'd already seen in the logs. "We've traced the activity back to Milan, Paris, and Zurich. Charges exceed $48,000, he said. Who do you suspect is behind this? My husband, I replied flatly. There was a long pause. Then a soft, well, that's new. I explained everything. The dummy account. The training program. The security logs. The fact that Victor was too arrogant to realize he'd hacked into a controlled environment with a tripwire built into every transaction. Agent Navarro chuckled. He's either very brave or very stupid. Why not both? I said, sipping my tea. When Victor finally came home 5 days later, he looked like a man who had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Impeccably groomed, tanned, teeth gleaming from some overpriced whitening session in Florence. Miss me? He asked, dropping his latest souvenir bag on the table. I looked up from my laptop, fighting back the smile threatening to form. Like a bad rash. He grinned. I brought you something from Milan. You really shouldn't have. He flopped onto the couch, arms behind his head. I figured you'd be mad. But let's be honest, you can afford it. And you've been so uptight lately. I thought I'd loosen things up. Oh, you definitely loosened something, I said, stepping into the kitchen. What's that supposed to mean? He asked. You'll find out, I said, my voice casual. Soon. He shrugged, unbothered. God, I missed our banter. I think this trip was good for me. I needed to feel alive again. He strutted into the bathroom to shower, humming as if he'd just won the lottery. I picked up my phone and texted Bianca. He's back. Let's move forward. Her response came within seconds. On it. Agent Navarro's standing by. As Victor's off-key singing echoed down the hallway, I opened the recording app on my phone and tapped record. Tonight, I'd get everything I needed, right from the source. Because the one thing Victor never learned? You don't steal from someone who builds traps for a living. And the snare had already snapped shut. Victor emerged from the bathroom in a cloud of steam and arrogance, wrapped in a white towel that probably cost more than my entire skincare routine. His hair was slicked back, his expression smug, and the scent of his new designer cologne clung to the air like a lie. He strutted into the living room and flopped onto the couch with theatrical flair. You should have seen Milan, babe. The architecture, the people, the fashion. He held out his arm dramatically, admiring his wrist. This watch? Limited edition. I talked the sales guy down a few grand, he didn't even know who he was dealing with. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, phone discreetly resting on the shelf behind me, recording everything. Sounds like you had a great time, I said coolly. Victor beamed. Oh, it was transformative. You know how I've always said I needed a break? A way to reset? This trip was exactly that. I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. I raised a brow. The version of yourself that commits federal crimes? He laughed, not catching the edge in my tone. Relax, Eliza. Don't make it all serious. You know I'm just living a little. I figured you'd understand once you saw the receipts, literally. He chuckled at his own joke and began rummaging through one of his bags, pulling out boxes, tags, and brochures from every stop he'd made. What did you think would happen when I saw all this? I asked, my voice as calm as ever. I figured you'd be mad at first, sure, he admitted, waving a hand dismissively. But then you'd get it. I mean, look around. You've got savings. You've got investments. I'm just borrowing some joy. Borrowing, I echoed, my lips pressed into a thin smile. Interesting choice of words. He glanced up from his unpacking, eyes narrowing slightly. Why do you keep sounding like you're reading me my Miranda rights? I shrugged. No reason. Just curious how you justified using someone else's credit card for your little European joyride. Victor froze, for just a second. Then he recovered, smirking. Come on, Eliza. You've got a dozen cards. I figured one swipe wouldn't kill you. I didn't think you'd even notice. One swipe? I repeated. Try 63 transactions across 4 countries. His eyes flickered again. Still, he pressed on. All right. Maybe I went a little overboard. But it's not like it hurt anyone. You're the cyber wizard. I figured you'd clean it up somehow. You always do. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Oh, I will. Just not in the way you think. He didn't respond right away, his jaw working. He sat back down, adjusting the towel-like armor. Look, if you're going to make a big deal out of this, let's talk about it. We're partners, right? We can figure it out. No, Victor, I said softly. We're not partners. We never were. You were a parasite. And I let you feed off me because I wanted to believe you had potential. His nostrils flared. So what, you're gonna throw me out over this? I tilted my head. Why don't you ask the agents instead? He blinked. What agents? Before I could answer, my phone lit up with a message from Bianca. Navarro's ready when you are. Police are en route. I looked back at Victor, who was suddenly very still. Do you remember that card you used? I asked. The platinum one? Yeah, he said warily. It's not a real account, I said. It's tied to my company's internal fraud detection system. It's a sandbox card, Victor. A trap. Every single purchase you made pinged a federal database in real time. The champagne in Paris? Flagged. That ridiculous trench coat? Logged. You've been a live experiment in what not to do with stolen financial data. His face drained of color. You're lying, he whispered. I picked up my phone and tapped on a screen. A dashboard full of his charges popped up, along with timestamps, locations, and video feed captures from store surveillance tied to international law enforcement. You turned yourself into a textbook case. And now you're about to become an example in court. There was a long, hollow silence. Then, knock, knock. 3 sharp taps at the door. Victor stood, towel slipping slightly as he moved toward the hallway. Eliza, tell me this is a prank. I turned and opened the door. Agent Marcus Navarro stepped in, flanked by 2 officers. Professional, composed, clipboard in hand. Good evening, Ms. Torres, he said. Is Mr. Victor Langston present? I stepped aside. He's right there. Victor looked like a man who just realized the floor wasn't real. Victor Langston, Navarro began, you're under investigation for multiple counts of credit card fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized access to financial property. We'd like you to come with us for questioning. Victor turned to me, wild-eyed. You're my wife. You can stop this. No, I said. I'm the person you stole from. Remember? You won't get away with this, he growled as the officers moved toward him. I already have, I replied. They cuffed him, read him his rights, and led him out the door without fanfare. The room felt lighter the moment it shut behind them. An hour later, I sat across from Bianca at a small cafe 2 blocks away, sipping tea as she scrolled through documents on her tablet. He's cooked, she said with a satisfied sigh. Navarro says the evidence is overwhelming. Your recordings, the sandbox triggers, the surveillance, they're filing formal charges tomorrow. I nodded, exhaustion hitting me all at once. He's trying to say you gave him permission, of course, she added. Of course, I muttered. But Navarro isn't buying it. We've got a clean digital trail. And your testimony seals the deal. I stared into my cup for a long moment, then smiled. Good. I'm ready. By the time news of Victor's arrest reached our circle of friends, the narrative had already escaped his grasp. What started as a quiet investigation and a few discreet cuffs in our living room had exploded into a full-blown scandal within days. The whispers began with former co-workers, then spread to mutual acquaintances, and finally landed where Victor had spent most of his energy curating a persona, on social media. The charming, carefree entrepreneur who once flooded his Instagram with motivational quotes and vision board victories was now tagged in headlines that read, tech startup consultant charged with international credit fraud. Victor Langston's empire, built entirely on borrowed charm and illusion, crumbled in real time. And I didn't feel sorry. I felt free. The morning after his arrest, Agent Navarro called to confirm what I already suspected. He tried to spin it, he said. Claimed you gave him the card. That you surprised him with a spontaneous vacation, and he thought it was a gift. I snorted. Let me guess. He didn't mention the part where he broke into my laptop at 2 in the morning to steal the number? Navarro chuckled on the other end. Oh, he conveniently left that part out. But don't worry, we've got the access logs, the file timestamps, your security camera footage, and the phone call recording. We've seen his messages, too. He doesn't have a leg to stand on. What happens next? I asked. We're filing formal charges, multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and unauthorized access. Because of the amount, nearly $50,000, and the international activity, this isn't small potatoes. He's looking at serious consequences. Jail? I asked, not because I needed it, but because I wanted the truth said out loud. If convicted, yes, Navarro replied. But he might take a plea deal to avoid it. Either way, restitution will be required, and his financial record will be a disaster zone for years. I thanked him, hung up, and took the deepest breath I'd taken in months. That afternoon, I pulled out a small cardboard box from the closet. Inside were the last of Victor's things that hadn't already been sold, pawned, or stuffed into his designer duffel. A few worn notebooks from his genius phase, 2 colognes he never wore, and a USB drive I'd once bought him when he claimed he was writing a novel. I dumped the contents into a trash bag and tossed the whole thing into the chute without ceremony. My apartment already felt different. Lighter. Mine. Bianca stopped by later with a bottle of wine and an armful of paperwork. "We're officially pushing forward with the divorce," she said, spreading the documents across my kitchen table. "You'll retain full ownership of your property and assets. The restitution terms we're filing mean he'll be legally obligated to repay what he tried to steal, plus legal fees." I poured us both a glass of wine. "And if he doesn't? Then a judge will freeze what's left of his accounts," she said with a smirk. "Good luck buying another imported blazer on store credit." I smiled. It wasn't the money I wanted back. It was the dignity. The autonomy. The silence that now filled the apartment without Victor's constant, manic energy bouncing off the walls. I signed the papers. For the first time, I was taking my name back, without his shadow attached to it. The fallout hit Victor like a hurricane he hadn't seen coming. Nicole, his mysterious friend who had once messaged him late at night with suspicious emojis and conference photos, dropped him the moment she saw his name trending on local news. She blocked his number, deleted their photos, and moved on like he'd never existed. His accounts were frozen. The watch? Confiscated. The tickets for a follow-up business trip to Amsterdam? Cancelled. The luxury hotels filed charges separately for unpaid expenses. Even his parents, who had long believed Victor was a misunderstood genius, called me in quiet disbelief. I kept it brief. "He made his choices," I said. "Now he lives with them." A week later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Eliza." His voice was hoarse, worn down, stripped of its usual gloss. "It's me. Victor." I leaned against the balcony railing, wine glass in hand. "You're calling from jail?" "No. They let me out on pre-trial. I'm staying at a friend's place." He paused, then added, "Not Nicole's." I didn't respond. "I messed up," he said quietly. I was desperate. I just wanted to feel like I wasn't a failure. "You wanted to feel important," I corrected. "So you stole, lied, risked everything. For what? A week of pretending?" "I thought you loved me," he whispered. "I did," I said. "I loved the man I thought you were. But that man never existed. You were a con, Victor. Even to yourself." He started to say something, but I ended the call before he could finish. There was nothing left to hear. A few days later, Bianca confirmed the plea deal. No jail time, just community service, full restitution, and a ruined financial record that would follow him like a ghost for years. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was enough. He would have to rebuild from zero. No more charm to fall back on. No more lifelines to exploit. Just the cold truth of his own actions. When the final divorce documents arrived in the mail, I didn't cry. I opened the envelope, read the words "finalized and irrevocable," and exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for 7 years. I toasted myself that night on the balcony. Not to revenge. Not to survival. But to clarity. To finally seeing through the illusion. To walking away without looking back. The silence in my apartment had changed. At first, after Victor's arrest, the absence of his presence felt jarring, like a TV that had suddenly cut to static. No more clinking coffee mugs at odd hours. No whiplash monologues about the next big thing. No overloud laughter at his own jokes. But as the days passed, the silence softened. It became peace. I didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore. I didn't have to pretend to be impressed, or supportive, or endlessly patient. The chaos was gone. And in its place, there was space to breathe. And to rebuild. The first thing I did was repaint the apartment. It sounds small, but color is powerful. The grays and deep blues Victor had insisted on, sleek and modern, he called them, always felt cold to me. So I chose warmth, soft terracotta, creamy white, and accents of gold. I repotted the dying plants he'd mocked as fussy and replaced them with trailing ivy and lavender. I rearranged the living room, bought a new rug, and threw away the couch cushions that still carried his cologne. Little by little, I erased him. Or maybe, More accurately, I reclaimed what had always been mine. Bianca dropped by a few days later with the finalized restitution agreement. "Congrats, my dear," she said, placing the thick envelope on my table. "It's official, he'll be repaying every cent. Slowly, of course. You may never see all of it, but he's legally locked in." I poured us both coffee and set a croissant on the plate beside her. "He can keep his money. I just wanted the truth documented." "You got more than that," Bianca said, smiling. "You got your life back." And she was right. For years, I'd sacrificed my voice, my instincts, even my self-respect, all in the name of making things work. I thought marriage meant endurance, that compromise was love. But compromise without respect is just erosion. Now, I was done eroding. The following week, I did something Victor always said I was too rigid to do. I booked a trip. Alone. Not to a bustling city or a beach resort, but to a quiet mountain cabin in Vermont. Just me, a stack of books, some snow-dusted hiking trails, and silence. Not the lonely kind, but the kind that fills you like breath in winter, crisp, pure, and clean. I spent the mornings walking under pine trees, my boots crunching in the snow. The afternoons were spent journaling, rediscovering forgotten parts of myself. I cooked simple meals, played old jazz records, and wrote in a leather notebook Victor had once called a waste of time. It turned out to be my favorite thing I brought with me. Back in the city, I returned with the clarity I hadn't known I needed. Victor, predictably, tried to reach out again. A desperate email. A vague apology. The usual cocktail of guilt and charm. He said he was working on himself, that he'd realized what he'd lost, that he was trying to start over. I didn't respond. Because I already had. I dove deeper into my work. With Victor gone, I found new focus. New purpose. I pitched a fraud awareness series to my company, using elements of my own story, disguised, of course, as a cautionary tale. Management loved it. I was invited to speak at a tech conference in San Francisco, then another in Austin. For the first time in a long time, people were listening to me for what I knew, not who I was attached to. I walked off stage in Austin to a standing ovation. And afterward, someone from a respected financial crimes task force offered me a consulting role. A position I wouldn't have been considered for 6 months ago, because Victor's drama would have followed me like smoke. But now? I was clear of him. At home, I resumed the friendships I'd let fade during my marriage. Lauren, my best friend from college, came by one night with Thai takeout and a bottle of wine. To surviving narcissists and thriving afterward, she toasted. I laughed, clinking my glass to hers. And to never, ever dating someone who just needs time to find himself again. We spent the evening on my new velvet couch, laughing about the past and dreaming about the future. "You look different," she said at one point, her voice soft. "Lighter. Like someone took a weight off your chest." "They did," I said. And he took his trench coat with him. The news about Victor continued to trickle in. Through whispers, emails, and the occasional awkward message from an old mutual acquaintance, I heard bits and pieces. He was struggling to find work. His resume, once padded with vague strategic consultant titles, now read like a caution sign. His name popped up on background checks. Some companies wouldn't even interview him. He'd moved back in with his older brother, according to one email. The high life was long gone. The luxury was stripped away. And while part of me understood what humiliation felt like, I didn't feel sorry. Because Victor hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen time. Trust. Safety. And now, he was living with the reality he created. One evening, as I watered the plants near my kitchen window, my phone buzzed with a message from Bianca. "Final restitution deposit just hit. You're fully reimbursed. Every cent." I stood in silence, staring at the number. It wasn't just a payment. It was closure. Not because I needed the money, but because I had won. Not out of vengeance, but with intelligence, precision, and grace. That night, I lit a candle, poured a glass of red wine, and curled up on the couch with my journal. I flipped to the page I'd labeled New Life and began writing. Not goals. Not dreams. Choices. Speak up when it matters. Don't silence yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Love is action, not charm. Always trust your instincts. Never apologize for protecting your peace. When I looked up, the apartment was quiet. Mine. And I had never felt more at home. A month had passed since the restitution cleared. A month of deep breaths, Long walks, quiet mornings, and no sign of Victor Langston. Not a message. Not a phone call. Not a knock on the door pretending to be an apology. And I'd preferred it that way. The last time I saw his name was in an email I deleted without opening. It didn't matter what it said. It didn't matter how long he spent writing it or how sorry he claimed to be. Some bridges don't burn, they sink under the weight of what they carried. Now, I lived without that weight. And for the first time in years, I was designing a life that didn't have to accommodate someone else's chaos. I began each day with coffee on the balcony, wrapped in a thick sweater as the city stirred below. The sun rose between the buildings, casting gold across my terracotta walls. The paint still felt fresh. The plants I'd repotted were thriving. I'd even hung up a piece of wall art I'd always loved but Victor had once called too soft. Turns out, softness is exactly what I needed. Work was steady and fulfilling. My company had offered me a leadership role in our fraud prevention unit, thanks in part to the mock case study I'd turned Victor's theft into, a project that was now used to train new hires on real-world detection. I didn't tell them the case was mine. Not exactly. But the satisfaction of seeing others learn from my story was enough. It meant something to turn pain into purpose. I was flying to Seattle in 2 weeks to speak at another summit. After that? Maybe a short trip to the coast. I'd earned the quiet. Lauren came by one Friday night with pizza and bad reality TV. We laughed until our cheeks hurt, critiquing strangers' choices and making up fake backstories for them. At one point, she paused during a commercial break and looked at me with a strange mix of pride and curiosity. "You ever think about dating again?" I sipped my wine. "Not yet." "Not ever?" I shrugged. "Maybe. But I'm not looking. I'm not rebuilding toward someone anymore. I'm building for me." She smiled. "I love that. So do I." Sometimes, I still receive tidbits of Victor's downfall from mutual acquaintances. He'd been rejected from several jobs. One recruiter found the news articles and blacklisted him. He was now doing part-time inventory work at a warehouse. His credit was in ruins, his reputation scorched, and the designer lifestyle he so adored reduced to what he could afford at clearance outlets. The man who once bragged about dining at rooftop bars in Milan now couldn't qualify for a store credit card. And honestly, that wasn't even the justice that mattered. What mattered was that his hands could no longer reach into my life, my wallet, or my peace of mind. I kept a small folder tucked away in my desk drawer. Not filled with legal papers or evidence, but with letters I'd written to myself over the past year, during therapy, during sleepless nights, during moments when I wasn't sure I was strong enough to follow through. Letters that said things like, "You are not responsible for his failures. You are allowed to let go. Survival is not love." They were reminders of how far I'd come. How deeply I'd grown. On the day my divorce became 1 year old, I did something I hadn't expected. I threw a small celebration. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet dinner with friends, a few candles, and a toast. To endings, I said as I raised my glass. And everything they make room for. The room echoed with clinks and laughter. Later that night, I stood on my balcony again, watching the city lights shimmer like stars. I thought of all the years I spent shrinking myself to fit into Victor's narrative. Trying to be the steady hand to his erratic brilliance. Forgiving what should have been red flags. Ignoring instincts I now knew had been right all along. And still, I didn't hate him. Because without him, I might have never seen what I was capable of. Not just in protecting myself, but in reclaiming joy. A few days later, I received a handwritten note in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Victor. It was rambling and desperate. The words ran in circles: remorse, regret, blame, confusion. He wrote that he was trying to change, that he still believed there was something real between us, that he missed who we used to be. I read it once. Then I dropped it into the shredder. Because I missed nothing. Who we used to be was never real. I had been the only real thing in that marriage. And now, I was the only one who still had everything to gain. 3 months later, I launched a personal blog, part professional, part personal. I called it Firewall Heart. I wrote about fraud protection, yes. But I also wrote about emotional boundaries, self-trust, financial independence, and rebuilding after betrayal. The posts gained traction, especially with women. Emails started pouring in. "Thank you for writing this." I thought I was alone. I finally closed the door on someone who kept stealing my peace. "Your story gave me the push I needed." And I realized, This was my purpose. Not just to prevent fraud in banking systems, but to help others guard their hearts, their finances, and their futures. One night, sitting by the window with my laptop and a cup of chamomile tea, I opened a blank post. I typed, "Sometimes, the person you love the most will be the one who harms you the deepest. But that doesn't make you weak. That makes you trusting. And trust is not a flaw, it's a strength that needs the right hands. When you learn to protect yourself, not with walls, but with wisdom, you stop fearing betrayal. You start living. And you realize that the life you were building for someone else? You can build it for yourself, and it will be stronger." I hit publish. Then I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the soft hum of my home, the home that no longer echoed with excuses or empty promises. Only the sound of possibility.